The elevator doors slid open with their familiar ding, and I stepped onto the 15th floor of Sterling Financial Tower. Just another Tuesday night shift ahead of me, mopping floors and emptying trash bins while the corporate world slept above me. I'd been working maintenance here for 3 years now, and the routine had become as predictable as clockwork. But tonight, something was different. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The executive floors were usually deserted by 9 p.m., but as I wheeled my cart toward the corner office, I heard music echoing through the hallway. Not the usual classical elevator music, but something with a heavy beat that made my feet want to move before my brain could stop them. I followed the sound, my curiosity getting the better of my professional boundaries. Through the glass walls of the main conference room, I saw her. Jessica Morrison, the CEO whose picture graced the lobby wall and whose name appeared on every company memo. She was alone, moving to the rhythm with the kind of stiff, awkward movements that screamed expensive dance lessons, but zero natural rhythm. Her designer heels clicked against the polished floor as she attempted what I could only assume was supposed to be salsa, but looked more like she was fighting off invisible attackers. I should have kept walking, should have minded my own business and continued with my rounds. But watching someone butcher a dance that had once been as natural to me as breathing was like watching someone take a sledgehammer to a Stradivarius. My body physically ached watching her struggle with steps that should flow like water. She must have sensed my presence because she stopped mid-spin and turned toward the doorway where I stood frozen, mop bucket in hand like some kind of janitor statue. Her face flushed crimson, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Here was Jessica Morrison, the woman who commanded boardrooms full of investors and made decisions worth millions, caught dancing alone in her conference room by the night custodian. "Don't stop on my account," I said, trying to break the tension with a smile. "Though, if you don't mind me saying, your partner seems to be stepping on your feet." She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did me. "Very funny. I suppose you think you could do better?" The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and something deep inside my chest stirred to life. Something I'd buried so deep I thought it had died, along with everything else I'd lost. "Actually, yeah, I do." Jessica crossed her arms, studying me with those sharp green eyes that had probably intimidated countless business rivals. "Really? The maintenance guy thinks he can outdance me? Tell you what," she continued, her voice taking on that boardroom edge I'd heard echoing from behind closed doors during late-night meetings. "Dance better than my ex, and I'm yours." The words hung in the air between us like a dare wrapped in a promise. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from attraction, though Jessica Morrison was undeniably beautiful, but from the sudden awakening of something I'd thought was dead and buried. The music was still playing, that Latin rhythm that used to be the soundtrack to my dreams. I should have laughed it off, made some joke about needing to get back to work, and walked away. But standing there in that sterile conference room with the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, not like the invisible worker who emptied her trash and vacuumed her carpets, but like someone worth challenging. Or maybe it was the music itself, calling to parts of me I'd locked away when life had demanded I choose between dreams and survival. "You sure about that?" I asked, setting down my mop bucket with more confidence than I'd felt in years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Because I have a feeling your ex wasn't much of a dancer. Jessica's eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting me to call her bluff. "What makes you so confident?" "Lucky guess," I replied, though my hands were already moving in ways they hadn't for 5 years, finding the rhythm that lived in my bones whether I wanted it there or not. But if we're making bets, shouldn't I know what I'm competing against? She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what I assumed were videos of her ex. Marcus thought he was God's gift to the dance floor. Took lessons at some fancy studio uptown, always talking about his natural rhythm, and how he could have been on Dancing with the Stars if he hadn't chosen law school. The way she said it told me everything I needed to know. Marcus had been all technique and no soul, the kind of dancer who counted beats instead of feeling them. "Let me see." She turned the phone toward me, and I watched 30 seconds of the most painfully mechanical salsa I'd ever witnessed. Marcus moved like he was following a instruction manual, each step calculated and precise but completely devoid of the passion that made dance something more than just moving your body in time with music. "Yikes," I said, handing the phone back. "And you dated this guy?" "For 2 years," she admitted with a grimace. "He convinced me I had no rhythm, that dancing was about following rules and proper form. Made me take lessons at his studio where they taught ballroom like it was military drill. No wonder you look like you're fighting the music instead of dancing with it." Jessica's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across her features before the CEO mask slipped back into place. "So what are you suggesting? That you, the night janitor, are going to show me how it's really done?" The challenge was clear, but so was the hunger in her voice. She wanted to be proven wrong, wanted someone to show her that dance could be something other than the rigid, joyless exercise Marcus had made it. And despite every rational thought screaming at me to walk away, to keep my head down and stick to emptying trash cans and mopping floors, I found myself nodding. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. What Jessica Morrison didn't know, what nobody in this building knew, was that Robert Martinez had once been somebody completely different. Before the maintenance uniform and the late-night shifts, before the single-father routine and the constant worry about making ends meet, I had been Roberto Martinez, principal dancer with the Miami Contemporary Dance Company. That name used to mean something in the dance world. Critics had called my performances transcendent and poetry in motion. I'd headlined shows from Lincoln Center to the Kennedy Center, my picture gracing the covers of Dance Magazine and Point. My signature piece, a contemporary interpretation of Astor Piazzolla's Libertango, had been featured in documentaries about modern Latin dance. For 8 years, I lived and breathed movement, my body a finely tuned instrument capable of expressing emotions that words could never capture. The transformation from Roberto to Robert hadn't happened overnight. It started with Maria's phone call on a rainy Tuesday in October, 5 years ago. I remember the exact moment because I was in rehearsal for what would have been my debut at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since childhood. The music stopped, my phone buzzed, and Maria's voice cracked as she told me about the accident. My sister had been driving home from her nursing job at Miami General when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact killed her instantly, but somehow, miraculously, 7-year-old Sophia survived in the back seat. My niece, who had called me Uncle Bobby since she could talk, was suddenly an orphan with nowhere to go. Maria had never mentioned Sophia's father beyond saying he wasn't in the picture, and there were no other relatives capable of taking her in. The choice should have been impossible. I was 31 years old, at the peak of my career, with contracts stretching 2 years into the future. The Bolshoi opportunity alone would have opened doors I'd dreamed about since dancing my first steps in my grandmother's kitchen in Queens. But when I got the call that Sophia was in the hospital, scared and alone and asking for me, there really wasn't a choice at all. I flew to Miami that night, missing the most important rehearsal of my career. By the time I saw Sophia in that hospital bed, her small face bruised and her arm in a cast, surrounded by machines and the antiseptic smell of institutional care, I knew my life as Roberto Martinez was over. She looked at me with Maria's dark eyes and asked when her mommy was coming back, and something inside my chest just shattered. The legal proceedings took 6 months. Adoption paperwork, custody hearings, background checks that scrutinized every aspect of my life. During that time, I kept dancing, trying to maintain some semblance of the career I was about to abandon. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. The movements felt hollow, the applause meaningless. How could I leap and spin and pour my soul into artistic expression when a little girl needed me to be present, stable, and reliable? Sophia's trauma manifested in ways that broke my heart daily. She stopped speaking for 3 months after the accident, communicating only through drawings that featured dark scribbles and crying stick figures. Night terrors plagued her sleep, leaving both of us exhausted and emotionally drained. The child psychologist explained that she needed consistency, routine, and a guardian who could be there for every nightmare, every therapy session, every moment of healing. Professional dance and single parenthood were incompatible in ways I hadn't anticipated. Even local companies required evening rehearsals, weekend performances, and touring schedules that would have meant leaving Sophia with babysitters more often than not. The few attempts I made to balance both resulted in missed pickups from school, canceled therapy appointments, and one devastating evening when Sophia had a panic attack and I was 3 hours away in Philadelphia, preparing for a show. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I quit dancing. The artistic world moved on without me, faster than I'd expected. Within a year, my name disappeared from programs, and my replacement in Miami had taken over my signature roles. The dance community was supportive but practical. There were always younger dancers ready to fill empty spots, always new talent emerging from conservatories and companies worldwide. My absence created barely a ripple in an ocean that had once felt like my entire universe. Moving to New York had been Sophia's idea, believe it or not. She'd seen pictures of Central Park in one of her picture books, and decided that living near a place with horses and boat rides would help her feel brave again. I'd liquidated everything I owned in Miami, used the money to secure a small 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, and started looking for work that would allow me to be present for every moment of her healing. The maintenance job at Sterling Financial wasn't glamorous, but it offered something precious: health insurance and a schedule that meant I could walk Sophia to school every morning and be home when she returned every afternoon. The night shift allowed me to earn a decent living, while being available during the hours she needed me most. My coworkers saw me as quiet and dependable, never suspecting that the man who cleaned their offices had once performed for audiences of thousands. Sophia knew about my dancing past, of course. Our apartment walls were covered with her artwork now instead of my performance photos, but she'd found the old reviews and programs I'd kept in a storage box. Sometimes she'd ask me to show her moves, and I'd demonstrate simple steps in our cramped living room, careful not to knock over the thrift store furniture that comprised our modest home. She'd been the one to notice how I moved differently when music played, how my body seemed to remember rhythms even when my mind tried to forget them. During her worst periods of grief, when words failed to comfort her, I'd put on music, and we'd dance together in our socks on the hardwood floor. Nothing choreographed or professional, just movement that helped us both process emotions too big for conversation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd ended up in a building where executives like Jessica Morrison probably spent more on a single business dinner than I made in a month, but the class differences had never bothered me. I'd grown up with very little, and dance had been my escape from a world where money determined opportunities. Success in the arts had taught me that wealth and fulfillment weren't necessarily connected, that some of the most miserable people I'd known had been wealthy patrons who collected dancers like artwork, but had never felt the pure joy of movement themselves. Watching Jessica struggle with basic salsa steps earlier had awakened something I'd thought was permanently dormant. Her movements were so restricted, so careful, that it was obvious someone had convinced her that dance was about rules rather than expression. The way she'd mentioned her ex's criticism suggested years of someone systematically destroying her confidence, teaching her to doubt her body's natural instincts. What she couldn't know was that her clumsy attempts at dancing were more authentic than her ex's mechanical precision. She was trying to feel the music instead of just counting beats, even if she didn't have the technique to express what she was hearing. There was something raw and honest about her willingness to look foolish in front of a virtual stranger, something that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with dance in the first place. Standing in that conference room, surrounded by the trappings of corporate success that felt as foreign to me as another planet, I realized I was about to reveal a part of myself I'd kept hidden for 5 years. Not just my technical ability, which I hoped was still intact despite the long hiatus, but the part of my soul that had made dancing more than just a career. The part that had understood music as a language more honest than words, movement as a conversation between body and emotion that transcended every barrier society created between people. Jessica Morrison had no idea that her casual challenge had just awakened Roberto Martinez, and I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for what came next. The next few weeks changed everything, though neither Jessica nor I recognized it at first. What started as an impulsive challenge in an empty conference room gradually evolved into something neither of us had planned or expected. Jessica began staying late more frequently, always finding reasons to be on the 15th floor when my shift started. Sometimes she'd be working genuinely, hunched over spreadsheets and quarterly reports that determined the company's future direction. Other times I suspected she was manufacturing excuses to cross paths with the maintenance worker who'd promised to show her real dancing. Our conversations started small and careful, the kind of polite exchanges that happen between people from vastly different worlds who are testing the boundaries of an unlikely friendship. She'd ask about my daughter, and I'd share carefully edited stories about Sophia's latest school projects or her progress in art therapy. Jessica would mention the stress of upcoming board meetings or difficult clients, and I'd listen with the kind of attention that seemed to surprise her. What struck me most about these early interactions was how hungry Jessica seemed for genuine conversation. Here was a woman who commanded respect in every professional setting, whose decisions affected thousands of employees and millions in revenue, but who appeared to have very few people in her life who saw her as anything more than her title and bank account. She laughed at my jokes with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely encountered humor that wasn't calculated for professional advantage. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening when I found her hospitalization and her relief that the episode hadn't resulted in more serious consequences. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, she explained, and the combination of deadline stress, prescription pain medication for a recent dental procedure, and wine with dinner had created a dangerous interaction she hadn't anticipated. As they talked, James found himself studying Emma's mannerisms and speech patterns for similarities to Sarah's personality traits, though he was careful not to stare in ways that might make her uncomfortable. There were subtle echoes in the way she used her hands while speaking, and the particular tilt of her head when she was thinking through complex ideas, gestures that seemed hauntingly familiar, despite the fact that he'd never met her before that night in the ambulance. The conversation gradually shifted from medical topics to more personal subjects, as Emma's initial wariness gave way to genuine appreciation for James's concern about her well-being. She'd moved to Austin from San Antonio 6 months earlier, she told him, seeking a fresh start after ending a relationship that had become more obligation than partnership. Her graphic design work allowed her to maintain clients throughout Texas while building a new life in a city that offered better opportunities for creative professionals. When James mentioned that he was a single father raising an 8-year-old daughter, Emma's expression softened with sympathy that seemed to come from personal experience with loss rather than polite concern. She asked thoughtful questions about the challenges of balancing paramedic work with parental responsibilities, demonstrating an understanding of single parenthood that suggested she'd either lived through similar circumstances or had close relationships with people who had. It was during this exchange that Emma made a casual reference to her family background that caused James's heart to skip several beats. She mentioned growing up with a twin sister who had died young, describing the unique bond that existed between twins and the devastating sense of incompleteness that followed such a loss. The way she spoke about her sister's death carried the weight of grief that James recognized from his own experience with Sarah's passing, though Emma's loss had occurred during childhood rather than young adulthood. James felt his mouth go dry as he processed this information, though he managed to maintain conversational composure, while his mind raced through implications that seemed too extraordinary to be credible. Emma continued talking about her sister's love of teaching and her dream of working with children, details that aligned perfectly with Sarah's career choices and personal interests. When she mentioned that her sister had planned to move to Austin before her death, James had to excuse himself briefly to regain his emotional equilibrium. The bathroom down the hall provided a private space where James could process what he'd just learned without Emma observing his reaction. If Emma was telling the truth about having a twin sister who had died young, and if that sister had been Sarah, then the identical tattoos and facial similarities suddenly made perfect sense. But the coincidence seemed too remarkable to be believed, even allowing for the strange ways that life sometimes connected people who were meant to find each other. When James returned to Emma's room, he found her looking through photographs on her phone, apparently searching for something specific among her digital memories. She looked up as he entered and held out her device, showing him a picture that confirmed his growing suspicions in ways that left him struggling to breathe normally. The photograph showed 2 young women who were clearly identical twins, their faces bearing the same bone structure and expressions that James had been noticing in Emma's features. One of the women in the photograph was unmistakably Sarah, though she appeared younger than James had ever seen her, probably in her early 20s based on the clothing styles and image quality. She was laughing at something beyond the camera's range, her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that James remembered from their happiest moments together. The other woman was obviously Emma, her hair styled differently and her expression more serious, but clearly the same person who was now sitting in the hospital bed, showing him proof of a connection that defied rational explanation. Emma explained that the photograph had been taken during their college years, before her sister had moved away to pursue her teaching career, and before the cancer diagnosis that had ended her life at such a young age. She spoke about Sarah with the kind of love and admiration that James recognized from his own feelings about his deceased wife, describing personality traits and dreams that matched perfectly with the woman he'd married and lost. As the conversation continued, Emma revealed details about Sarah's life that James had never known, stories from their childhood and adolescence that provided context for the woman his wife had become. She described Sarah's decision to pursue elementary education, her love of animals and volunteer work, and her romantic nature that led her to believe in soulmates and cosmic connections between people who were destined to find each other across time and distance. The afternoon dissolved into evening as James and Emma shared memories of the same person from completely different perspectives, their conversation creating a bridge between past and present that neither had anticipated when this unexpected reunion began. Emma's stories filled gaps in James's understanding of Sarah's background, while his descriptions of their marriage and Lily's birth provided Emma with knowledge about her sister's final years that she'd missed due to family estrangement and geographical distance. By the time visiting hours ended, both James and Emma understood that their meeting represented more than medical coincidence or random chance. They were connected through Sarah's memory in ways that created obligations and opportunities that neither felt prepared to navigate, but both recognized as too significant to ignore. Emma would be discharged the following morning, and James found himself hoping that their connection would continue beyond the artificial intimacy of a hospital room conversation. As he drove home to relieve Mrs. Chen and spend the evening with Lily, James wrestled with questions about how to explain this extraordinary development to his daughter, and whether Emma's presence in their lives represented healing or simply a different kind of loss. Sarah had often talked about the possibility that love could transcend death, but James had never imagined that such transcendence might arrive in the form of a twin sister who carried his wife's face and memories into a future that suddenly seemed filled with unexpected possibilities. The decision to introduce Emma to Lily came 3 weeks after their hospital encounter, though James had wrestled with the timing and approach throughout countless sleepless nights. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the woman sitting across from you carries the face of her deceased mother, that genetics and circumstance have conspired to bring someone into their lives who represents both profound comfort and potential confusion? James had consulted Lily's school counselor, read articles about childhood grief and healing, and even called his sister in Dallas for advice, but ultimately decided that honesty would serve his daughter better than any carefully crafted explanation designed to minimize emotional impact. They met at Zilker Park on a Saturday afternoon when Austin's spring weather had reached that perfect balance between winter's chill and summer's oppressive heat. James had suggested a public setting for their first meeting, thinking that the playground environment might have been practicing, she asked. I bet you'd be a much better dance teacher than either of us. And just like that, Sophia became the bridge that connected our separate worlds, her natural warmth and artistic spirit creating a space where CEO and maintenance worker, former principal dancer, and current single father could exist together without the weight of social expectations or professional boundaries. The invitation came on a Monday morning, delivered to my maintenance supervisor, along with specific instructions that it was to be hand-delivered to Robert Martinez immediately. I'd never received official company correspondence before, and the elegant envelope with Sterling Financial's embossed logo felt foreign in my work-worn hands. Inside was a formal request from Jessica Morrison, Chief Executive Officer, for my participation in the company's annual charity gala. But this wasn't just any participation. She was asking me to perform as the featured entertainment for an event that would host 300 of New York's most influential business leaders, philanthropists, and media personalities. The gala was being held to raise funds for children's arts programs throughout the city, with a specific focus on providing creative opportunities for underprivileged youth and children with special needs. The theme was Hidden Talents, celebrating the idea that extraordinary abilities often exist in unexpected places. Jessica wanted me to dance, to reveal my true identity in front of an audience that included board members, investors, and colleagues who knew me only as the invisible man who emptied their trash bins. My hands shook as I read the letter. She was asking me to step back into Roberto Martinez's shoes after 5 years of careful anonymity, to risk everything I'd built for Sophia's stability on a single performance that could either resurrect my career or destroy the quiet life we'd constructed together. The practical concerns were overwhelming. What if someone recognized me and word spread through the dance community? What if my past became public knowledge and affected Sophia's school environment? What if I'd lost too much technique during my hiatus and embarrassed myself in front of people whose respect Jessica needed to maintain her position? But buried beneath the fear was something else entirely. Excitement, the desperate, hungry anticipation of an artist who'd been forced into hibernation, finally sensing the possibility of resurrection. My body had been aching for real expression, for the chance to speak the language that had defined me long before fatherhood had reshaped my priorities. I found Jessica in her office that evening, working late as usual, surrounded by the controlled chaos of someone juggling multiple complex projects simultaneously. The city sparkled beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lights creating a backdrop that seemed designed for dramatic conversations. "You're insane," I said without preamble, placing the invitation on her mahogany desk. "You know that, right?" Jessica looked up from her laptop, her green eyes bright with the kind of mischievous intelligence that had probably terrified competitors throughout her career. "I prefer visionary, but insane works too. Are you going to do it? Do you have any idea what you're asking?" I leaned against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted by the weight of decisions I thought I'd put behind me forever. "This isn't just about dancing for your charity gala. You're asking me to out myself as Roberto Martinez in front of 300 people who will remember that name and wonder what happened to him." "I'm asking you to be who you really are," Jessica replied, closing her laptop and giving me her full attention. "I've spent weeks watching you transform from a man who was hiding from himself into someone who's remembering what it feels like to be alive. You light up when you talk about dance, Robert. Your whole body changes when music plays. You've been dying slowly in that maintenance uniform, and we both know it." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had been dying, gradually suffocating under the weight of responsibilities and sacrifices that had seemed necessary but were slowly eroding the core of who I'd always been. Sophia had noticed it too, asking me recently why I looked sad even when I was smiling, why I seemed to be holding my breath all the time. "What about Sophia?" I asked, voicing my greatest fear. "What happens to her stability if this goes wrong?" If people start asking questions about why Roberto Martinez disappeared and what he's been doing for 5 years. Jessica stood up and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights. "What happens to Sophia if her father continues to pretend that half of his soul doesn't exist? What kind of example are you setting by teaching her that dreams are things you abandon when life gets complicated?" "I didn't abandon my dreams," I protested. "I chose her. I chose being the father she needed over being the dancer I wanted to be." "Those don't have to be mutually exclusive choices," Jessica said, turning back to face me. "Sophia is proud of your dancing. She talks about it constantly when we practice together, about how you used to perform for thousands of people, but now you dance just for her in your kitchen. She doesn't see your past as something you sacrificed. She sees it as something special that you share with her." The mention of Sophia and Jessica practicing together surprised me. I knew they'd developed a friendship of sorts, but I hadn't realized how much time they'd been spending together or how much Sophia had shared about our private moments. "She's been coming to the conference room?" I asked. "Every Tuesday and Thursday after her art program," Jessica admitted. "She sits in the corner and draws while we work on basic steps. Her artwork during those sessions is extraordinary, Robert. She's creating visual interpretations of movement and music that would make professional dancers weep. She's inherited your artistic gifts, just expressed through a different medium." The idea of Sophia witnessing Jessica's dance lessons, contributing her own creative interpretation to their sessions, filled me with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Pride mixed with terror, love tangled with the desperate fear of losing control over the carefully constructed life that had kept us both safe and stable. "The performance would be in 6 weeks," Jessica continued, approaching slowly as if I were a skittish animal that might bolt. "That's enough time to create something new, something that tells your story without compromising Sophia's privacy, something that celebrates hidden talents and second chances, and the idea that art can survive even the most difficult circumstances." "What kind of performance?" I heard myself asking, though part of my mind was screaming warnings about the dangerous territory we were entering. Contemporary piece, probably 8 to 10 minutes. Original choreography that incorporates elements of your classical training but speaks to where you are now, who you've become as both an artist and a father. The charity's focus is on children's programs, so the piece should somehow reflect that connection. Jessica had clearly been planning this for weeks, maybe since the first night she'd challenged me to dance. The scope and specificity of her vision suggested hours of thought and research. Conversations with program coordinators and event planners that had shaped this opportunity around my particular story and circumstances. You've already committed to this, haven't you? I realized. You've told the charity board that you have a featured performer lined up. I've told them that Sterling Financial is sponsoring a special performance by a world-class artist who exemplifies the event's theme of hidden talents, Jessica confirmed. I may have exaggerated slightly about having confirmed your participation, but I was confident you'd say yes. Why? I asked, genuinely curious about her certainty. What made you so sure I'd risk everything I've built to dance for your corporate friends? Jessica smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, the expression reached her eyes completely. Because you're not just a former dancer, Robert. You're not just a devoted father. You're an artist who's been suffocating for 5 years. And artists need to create the way other people need to breathe. I recognize the symptoms because I've been dying the same slow death in this corporate tower, surrounded by success that feels meaningless because it's not connected to anything I actually care about. The vulnerability in her admission surprised me. Here was Jessica Morrison, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, admitting that her own life felt as empty and constrained as mine did. The parallel between our situations hadn't occurred to me before, but suddenly I could see it clearly. We'd both sacrificed essential parts of ourselves for external measures of success and security, and we were both slowly withering from the inside out. 6 weeks. I repeated, my mind already beginning to choreograph possibilities despite my conscious reservations. Contemporary piece, 8 to 10 minutes, theme of hidden talents and second chances. With Sophia's artwork projected as backdrop, Jessica added, her excitement building as she sensed my resistance weakening. She's created an entire series inspired by watching us practice. Abstract pieces that capture the emotion of dance through color and form. We could create something that celebrates both your artistic gifts, a father-daughter collaboration that shows how creativity can be passed down and transformed across generations. The idea of incorporating Sophia's art into my performance, of creating something that honored both our individual talents and our shared journey, was the detail that finally broke through my carefully constructed defenses. This wouldn't just be Roberto Martinez returning to the stage. This would be Robert Martinez, devoted father and hidden artist, claiming space for both identities to coexist. I'll need access to a proper rehearsal space, I said, my professional mind already taking over as I began to accept the impossible. And I'll need to see Sophia's artwork series to understand how the visual elements should integrate with the movement. Jessica's smile was radiant with triumph and relief. Sterling Financial has a private gym on the 20th floor with mirrors and sound system, and Sophia's been working on the dance-inspired pieces specifically for this project. She knows about the performance, Robert. She's been hoping you'd say yes. The revelation that Sophia had been involved in planning this elaborate surprise, that she'd been creating artwork specifically designed to accompany my return to professional performance, overwhelmed me with a mixture of love and terror that left me speechless. In 6 weeks, Roberto Martinez would take the stage again, but this time he wouldn't be performing alone. Part 5. The Resolution. The night of the Sterling Financial Charity Gala, I stood backstage in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, wearing a custom-fitted black shirt and pants that felt both foreign and familiar after 5 years in maintenance uniforms. Through the curtains, I could hear the murmur of 300 voices, the gentle clink of champagne glasses, and the soft jazz quartet that had been entertaining guests during dinner. Sophia sat beside me on a folding chair, her legs swinging nervously as she clutched the program that featured her artwork on the cover. She looked beautiful in the navy dress Jessica had helped her pick out, her dark hair pulled back with a silver clip that caught the backstage lights. Despite her excitement, I could see the nervousness in her eyes, the weight of understanding that tonight would change everything for both of us. "Daddy, are you scared?" she asked, her small hand finding mine and squeezing tight. "Terrified," I admitted, because honesty had always been the foundation of our relationship. But sometimes the things that scare us most are the things we need most. Jessica appeared from behind the sound equipment, radiant in an emerald dress that complemented her eyes perfectly. She'd coordinated every detail of this evening, with the precision that had made her benefited everyone involved. Their relationship had evolved into something that friends and colleagues struggled to categorize, but that felt natural and necessary to the three people living it. Emma provided Lily with access to her mother's history and personality traits, while James offered Emma the opportunity to know the daughter that Sarah had loved but that she'd never had the chance to meet. Together, they'd created a support system that honored the past while embracing an uncertain but hopeful future. The one-year anniversary of Emma's emergency call became a date they marked not with sadness, but with gratitude for the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. They celebrated at the same park where they'd first met as a family, this time with a picnic that included friends from work, neighbors who'd become extended family, and children from Lily's class who'd grown accustomed to having Emma attend school events and birthday parties as an honorary aunt. James reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that night when he'd rolled back a patient's sleeve and discovered a tattoo that would challenge everything he thought he understood about coincidence, destiny, and the persistence of love beyond death. The paramedic who had responded to that emergency call had been a man focused on survival, doing whatever was necessary to provide for his daughter while managing his own grief. The person he'd become was someone who understood that healing often arrived in unexpected forms, and that the courage to remain open to possibility could transform tragedy into triumph. Emma's presence in their lives had taught them that family could expand to include people who shared love for the same person, even when that person was no longer alive to facilitate the connection. Sarah's death had seemed like an ending, but her twin sister's arrival had revealed it to be a transition that made new forms of love and support possible when the right people were brave enough to trust in outcomes they couldn't predict or control. As the sun set over Austin's skyline, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded James of Sarah's favorite colors, he watched Lily and Emma work together on a mural that would be displayed at the next community safety fair. Their collaboration was natural and joyful. Two artists separated by 20 years, but united by shared DNA and complementary talents that created something beautiful when combined with patience and mutual respect. The future stretched ahead of them, filled with ordinary moments and extraordinary possibilities, proof that love never truly dies, but sometimes transforms into new relationships that serve the same essential purposes while honoring the memory of what came before. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, mixed with something deeper and more personal. "Sho," she said, her voice barely audible over the continued applause and conversation. "I believe someone made a promise about dancing better than their ex." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its genuine joy. "I think that challenge was met and exceeded." "It was," Jessica agreed, moving closer until we were standing in our own small bubble of intimacy despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. "Which means you're mine now, according to the terms of our original agreement." "Actually," I said, reaching for Sophia, who had appeared at my elbow, still clutching her program and beaming with happiness, "I think we're yours, if you want us." Jessica knelt down to Sophia's level, her expensive dress pooling around her on the floor without any concern for designer fabric or public appearance. "What do you think, Sophia? Should we make this official?" Sophia looked between us with the kind of serious consideration that only children can bring to life-changing decisions. Then she smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "I think Daddy needs someone to help him remember he's Roberto Martinez and Robert Martinez at the same time. And I think you need someone to teach you that the best dancing happens in kitchens." 6 months later, we were a family in ways that had nothing to do with legal paperwork and everything to do with the daily rhythms we'd created together. Jessica had stepped back from some of her CEO responsibilities to launch a nonprofit focused on arts education for underprivileged children. I split my time between performing again and teaching dance to kids who reminded me why movement mattered more than technique. Our kitchen had become the heart of our home, where Sophia's artwork covered the refrigerator, where Jessica practiced her improving salsa steps while dinner cooked, where I danced with both my girls to whatever music moved us on any given evening. The Sterling Financial Building still had its maintenance staff, but I was no longer among them. Instead, I taught weekly dance classes in the converted conference room where Jessica had first challenged me, programs for employees who wanted to discover their own hidden rhythms. Sometimes, late at night when Sophia was asleep and the city sparkled beyond our windows, Jessica and I would dance in our living room to whatever music suited our mood. No audience, no pressure, no need to prove anything, except that love, like dance, was about feeling the rhythm that connected two people and trusting it to carry them wherever they needed to go. The old Roberto Martinez had danced for applause and critical acclaim. Robert Martinez danced for the pure joy of movement, for the woman who had challenged him to remember who he was, and for the daughter who had taught him that the most beautiful performances happen when nobody else is watching. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.